Welcome to Murder in the Air Mystery Theater. I'm your host, Laurie Fagen. In this podcast series, I'll interview authors who will then read their mystery, suspense, or thriller short stories or a chapter from their published books. In addition, sprinkled throughout the coming weeks, the podcast will feature radio theater style sections from the audiobooks for my 3 crime fiction novels. There will be prizes too, so stick around to the end to find out how to enter. Our guest today is Pat Spencer, who's from the beautiful Southern California town of Capistrano Beach. Thanks for joining us on Murder in the Air Mystery Theater, Pat.
Thank you for having me, Laurie. I just want to say how much I appreciate you having me on your podcast. And thank you for the support that you give to so many fellow authors.
Thank you, and you're very welcome. Glad we could have you on. Now, Pat has written a number of books, including a historical fiction novel inspired by true life events called Golden Boxty in the Frypan, an international thriller called Story of a Stolen Girl, which deals with sex trafficking, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. And then she has a literary fiction novel set in 1960s South Africa, which is coming in 2023, called Sticks in a Bundle, The Early Years. Pat, those are a lot of very different genres. Do you find any particular challenges writing in all those different areas?
Yes, there are challenges. It's the issue of genre that's the biggest challenge. For me, it's the story that needs telling that dictates the genre. I've always read across the 3 genres from which I've written my novels. So I'm no stranger to the personality and the characteristics, or you might say the rules of writing in these genres. Having said that, though, even though I read lots of good books within the 3 genres from which I write, thriller, historical, and literary fiction, before I began writing each novel, I conducted a considerable amount of research on the nuances of each genre by reading articles, taking classes online, watching craft videos online. Laurie, there really is a wealth of information in the articles posted online if one takes the time to search them out and read them, and then spend some time thinking about what does all this information about that genre mean for the story that you plan to tell. Then there's the personality of my protagonist to consider. How would she like her story presented to the world? What genre provides the best framework on which to build an understanding of the challenges she faces, her thoughts, her fears, hopes, and dreams? I also review the elements of points of view and tense. Present tense, past tense, first person or third person POV. And lastly, what is the message that she and I want the reader to take away from her story? Once I've thought all that through, which takes quite a while and usually a few dreams at night and waking up in the middle of the night, I generally don't have many problems writing within the selected genre, the tense, and the POV. It's that background work and thinking that sets me up. I mean, I'm in the character's mind and I'm in her world, and I know how she needs her story told. The only negative I've heard is from agents and some other writers saying that it may not be to an author's advantage to publish books from different genres. And I think what they're saying is, for example, in my case, with my first novel, Story of a Stolen Girl, I built a readership of folks who enjoy thrillers, suspense, crime, and are fond of female heroes. While it's true that we all have a small base of readers, your mom, your dad, your brother, relatives and friends who will read everything we write, I've heard the marketing experts say that authors should be aware that many readers stay close to their preferred genre. For example, in an Amazon search, if a potential reader types in thriller, suspense, and female hero, my second and third novels are not going to pop up as suggested reading. And so someone who thinks they like my style of writing isn't going to, if they can't remember my name, it's not going to find it by putting in the keywords that they remember as being themes for the book. However, all writers I know and most readers I know read across genre lines these days. And so hopefully they will find enjoy the books I've written when they come available. One thing that I might help with my work is that it's also been called book club fiction. And I think that category fits nicely. Book clubs are made up of widely read folks with diverse interests for the most part. There are mystery book clubs and there are classic book clubs, but for the most part, they are a diverse group that read across the genre lines. And the books they choose are a reflection of their various personalities, their preference, their interests. So their book selections wander through the genres, kind of like my writing does. So I'm hopeful for that. But for me, the question is, will a reader who enjoyed the fast pace of my thriller, Story of a Stolen Girl, become frustrated with following the windy road of literary fiction with an emphasis on emotion or character development, reflection, lots of internal dialogue? Or will the reader find the focus on a historical place and issues of era sufficiently interesting if the protagonist is not under some extreme and immediate threat typically found at the center of a thriller? So for me, that's a complex challenge that keeps the writing process interesting.
I would guess it's very interesting that way because not only, most of us do a lot of research about the story we're going to write, but you're going even way beyond that for the genre that you're going to write in. But like you said, it's what you want to write and it's what story you want to tell, right? And that really is what it comes down to. Why are we going to write something if we're not interested in it ourselves as writers, correct? Exactly.
And with everything that I've written so far, there's a deep purpose in it for me. There's a message. I'm a retired college professor and a college president, so this is probably in my blood and will never be washed away, but there's a need to inform. There's a need to address controversial issues. I need for the message to be heard. It's important to me that it's not just a pleasant read, but that it makes people think and can even stimulate disagreements between the readers and disagreements with their own previous thoughts or perspectives on the topic.
Well, then that takes us right into probably the reason why you chose the topic of sex trafficking for Story of a Stolen Girl. Because of the message, would I guess correctly? Or tell us why you decided to use that as your basis for that novel.
Laurie, you're absolutely correct. I wanted to raise awareness of this horrific crime. There are many people working on changing what is happening to our young women. Some young men, but mostly female girls and young women. I had the ability with my writing skills to raise awareness. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not rich, so I can't donate $10 million. But writing to raise awareness was the thing that I felt like I could do to raise awareness. Most people believe that sex trafficking only happens in third world countries. Americans have no idea how enormous the industry is in the United States. It's close to $10 billion every year, just in the United States, and $150 billion worldwide. There's no state in which sex trafficking does not happen. But in my state, California holds the distinction of having the 3 counties that are among the counties with the highest ranking in sex trafficking. That's San Diego County, Los Angeles County, and San Francisco County. More young women and children are sex trafficked than any other place in the United States. And so it struck home. I'm surrounded by San Diego and Los Angeles County. San Francisco County is not so far away that it seems like a foreign place. And I just felt like this is where I could do something to help.
And I think that's a great reason to do it and to be writing like you are. So let's talk a little bit more. You've talked about the research that it takes for your genre and some for your characters and everything. What is your writing process like? What is your best time to write? Tell us a little bit about that.
I would say my writing process probably would remind one of a messy Irish stew. I try to write every day. I try to be organized and tidy about my work, but it goes against my nature. I don't have a regular schedule except to make sure I get something written every day. My notes are always everywhere. They're scattered. I aspire to write a comprehensive outline before writing. I did a decent job of that when I was writing Golden Boxty and the Frypan. And that was only because I was really forced to by outside forces. My cousins were contributing and they would call me or email me or send me something. And it was hit and miss. They would say, "Oh, I just thought of this story my dad told me. Oh, I just thought of this awful thing that happened to my mom." And so they would send these to me. And so I had this stack of emails and pieces of paper with my notes that were just helter-skelter. And so I didn't want to lose any of the stories. The book is it's inspired by my mother's experience. It's not biographical. But the true stories, I didn't want to lose any of them. I wanted to make sure that the pieces were true that we found. I wanted to get in there. So basically what I've settled for the most part, is making a rough outline after I write each chapter so that I don't get confused. I didn't do that with Story of a Stolen Girl, and my husband was one that noticed that at one point I had Sally coming down the stairs, and he goes, "Who's Sally and what's she doing in the house?" She hadn't arrived yet. So I believe a nice outline would prevent those silly things, but I just can't seem to get to them. Laurie, my process is slow. I am not a fast writer. Typically, I review what I wrote the day before. Then I write some new material. And then during both phases, I'm checking to see that I included all the senses, as well as using the historical base of the era. That means hopping back over to search the internet for food and dress and music and political happenings and social mores and realistic dialect from the time and place in which I'm writing. There are times I'll sit down and think, okay, I've got 2 hours to write. And I end up writing for 15 minutes and then researching for an hour and 45. So it takes a long time. My editing process is long and painful. I edit until my brain fries. I do a manuscript search for overuse, prepositions, conjunctions, filler words, and words that I know I tend to overuse. I've made a checklist of these things that amounts to over 500 such words. And so when my manuscript is somewhat finished, I go through and searching for each of these words. And then I have a list of alternative words that I can try out for those. I also use Pro Writing Aid, and I read the manuscript out loud to myself. Not that anybody's listening, but I find that when I read it out loud to myself, I do find things that I did not pick up when I was just reading. Then I have the computer read aloud to me. Then I actively participate in a writing critique group. And so I take it to not the whole manuscript, but we sign up, for submissions. I take it to my critique group, and I find their feedback so valuable. I've learned an amazing amount from the members of my critique group, the Orange County Write On group. And so it's long. As I said in the beginning, my editing process is long and painful. The only part that's fun is taking it to the writing critique group. They're a fun group.
Good. What is the most surprising thing you've discovered about writing along the way?
The most surprising thing to me was that fiction writing is much more difficult than nonfiction. I thought it would be much easier to just make stuff up, but I was so wrong. I've done a lot of nonfiction writing within my working career, and I literally sold everything I wrote. I was successful in that I found a niche related to my career, and I just stayed in it. I published in a major newspaper, a tabletop magazine, trade magazines, and I enjoyed it immensely. But I always thought I wanted to write fiction. I just felt like I didn't have the time and the leftover brain cells after working to be able to do a good job. So after I retired, I took a few years off from writing, but I missed the mental stimulation of the writing process and the joy of publishing. I mean, there's just nothing like seeing your own name in print. So I started on the dream I'd held of writing fiction, only to learn that it's really, really hard. When I wrote my textbook, I wrote the whole thing. I sent it off to one publisher. They said it was a tad too long, cut about 50 pages, and we'll publish it. So that's what I expected when I wrote my first novel. What a rude
Didn't happen,
awakening. No, I ended up self-publishing Story of a Stolen Girl because I'm sure I sent out about maybe 100 query letters and samples, whatever they wanted. And I didn't get, I got one phone call from one agent and she said, "When did this happen?" And I said, "Well, it's well researched, but it is fiction." "Oh, well, I'm not interested then." And I thought, well, if it was so well written that you thought it was fact, gosh, I thought, well, that doesn't make sense to me.
Do you think it was the subject?
It could be. There are quite a few books. When you go on Amazon, there's quite a few books on trafficking, novels written on it. So maybe it's just at the point where there's too many. I have friends who wouldn't read it. They don't want to know. They don't want to know. And so right. It's not a book, probably. You have to like crime and mystery and suspense. It's not, it's not a romance. It's not a beach read. And so a lot of people don't want to read that, which is okay. Sometimes I don't want to read it either.
Sure.
But I don't really know. With that book, I never got enough feedback as to why there wasn't, someone didn't take it.
What are you working on next? And you can talk a little bit about Golden Boxty, because I got to find out a little bit more about the whole title and what that means, and then tell us about your next project too.
Okay. I'll talk about the Africa series first. Currently, I have 4 novels under contract. 3 are with the publisher. The books are finished, and they are with the publisher. And 1 is a work in progress. I'm engaged in a 3-book contract with Scarsdale Publishing for my trilogy, Sticks in a Bundle. Scarsdale is a small traditional publisher in New York. And they have book 1 and 2, so we'll be beginning the editing process soon. And I'm continuing to write book 3. Sticks in a Bundle is a cross genre. It's a work of literary and historical fiction. It's inspired by the life of a young girl coming of age under the rule of apartheid in South Africa. And the trilogy spans a little over 30 years. And I think Sticks in a Bundle especially falls nicely into the book club category. It's a good, timely book club read because it reveals the history of power and prejudice and inequality many know little about, as experienced from the point of view of a young girl who's trying to understand it herself. I hope to have book 3 finished by the end of summer. And one new thing I learned, not everybody publishes a series in the same manner. Some people put out one book, like about a year, 1 year, then they put out book 2, book 3, some publishers. This company wants all 3 finished. And then when they release book 1, book 2 and book 3 are there available for pre-sale, because they think they don't want people, if they love book 1, they don't want them to go away and about their lives and forget about it. They want them to click on the button for pre-sale for book 2, maybe even book 2 and 3.
So talk about Golden Boxty.
Okay, that's the historical novel. And it's under contract with Pinnit Publications, which is a small traditional publisher in Texas. And I expect it to be released the end of 2023. Golden Boxty is inspired by my mother's experience as an orphan during the Great Depression. And as I mentioned earlier, it's enhanced by family stories and photos shared by my cousins. The orphanage that 4 of them ended up in is an orphanage of some ill repute. It's in Pueblo, Colorado. And so in that, I really wanted to talk about what was the situation of this? Why was it that children who still had 1, sometimes 2 parents were put in an orphanage? This orphanage, these 4 were in, it was a Catholic orphanage. And, we've heard a lot lately about religion, the Catholic religion in particular, and some of the atrocities. And it's not new. This, the Colorado DA who investigated, their study went back from 1950 to 1998. Some action was taken, not a lot, not an action that would please me, but the orphanage is defunct. It's out of business. And for those victims, like my mother and her 3 youngest brothers who were in the orphanage, the atrocities committed against them are now family history. None of them are alive. So
right.
they can't go back. And that was what the DA said. We can only go back to those victims who are alive. Or, the rest of it is hearsay. So, but at least this topic, I think, like human trafficking, is getting more and more attention and more resources and more accountability. So it's a good thing that that's happening.
Good.
In the Sticks in a Bundle and in Golden Boxty in the Frypan, I feature traditional and cultural foods from each era, and that's where the name of Golden Boxty in the Frypan comes. Katie, who's my mom, when she's young, she's about 6 years old. They live in a very poor tenement flat, and Katie's not allowed to go out and play because the neighborhood's too darn dangerous. She has no friends. She doesn't go to school yet. Her mother, she's small, so her mom won't even let her start school yet. She's making her wait a year. And so there's a little old woman downstairs who makes friends with Katie. And whenever anything goes wrong, and stuff does, her friend, they make Boxty because her friend says whenever there's Boxty frying in the fry pan, everything's going to be okay. Especially if you add an extra pat of butter, it's going to be okay. So that's where the title came from. And I'm going to use these recipes as to help promote my book. I have a place on my website where you can sign up to get the recipes. My granddaughter and I are recreating all of these recipes. Some of them have been marvelous successes. Irish wait cake is really good. I mean, it's good enough you don't have to wait for somebody to die to make it and serve it. Our foray into peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwiches on Wonder Bread, not so popular with the family. That one didn't go over so good, but we're having a lot of fun doing it.
How fun. And to get to work with her as well. That sounds great. Okay, Pat, please set up the section that you're going to read from in A Story of a Stolen Girl.
First, let me say Story of a Stolen Girl is dedicated worldwide to all the stolen girls. May they be found. Darby remembers sitting at the tables of a private gambling club, but not how she ended up in Ankara, Turkey. Authorities are baffled. Her mother is frantic. She has a plan to bring her daughter home, but if it fails, all is lost. Chapter 1, Darby Richards, Day 2, Sunday, March 18th. A door slammed and reverberated like a gunshot through a tunnel. Darby hugged her knees to her chest. When the vibration spent its energy and fell silent to the floor, she opened one eye, a tiny slit, to a room engulfed in darkness. She thought she called out, yet no sound escaped her lips. In the distance, muffled voices, men talking, laughing. She strained to hear what they were saying. Their accent was familiar, not Spanish, maybe Middle Eastern, but she didn't comprehend a single word. Darby's body convulsed, whether from fear or cold, she was unsure. Her breath came in raspy spurts. Heavy footsteps moved her way. She covered her mouth and prayed the men wouldn't hear her whimper. No, please no. When the flutter of her heart accelerated into pounding, she pressed her palm against her heart, afraid the men might hear. She contracted her muscles to force her body still, but the tension made her quiver more. Darby didn't know where she was, only that it wasn't her choice. Thoughts coming at the speed of sludge, she slipped her fingers through her tangled hair and massaged her aching head. Every limb weighed heavy and awkward. She labored to sit. With flailing arms, she probed for something on which to anchor, then cringed when her hand rammed into a wall. Her fingers dug into its roughness and latched onto a ridge. She told herself, pull harder. Pain knifed toward her elbow. Thick liquid oozed from her fingers. Her vision blurred and blackened as she crumpled onto the oily mattress. Mom. Darby couldn't tell how long she remained unconscious, and no one was there to care. Yet she understood instinctively she was safer alone. Her hand throbbed. 3 fingernails hung loose. She rubbed off the blood crusted into rivulets on her hand and arm. I must get out before the men come back. Darby braced against the cot's iron headrail and staggered on wobbly legs to the far side of the box-like room. She ran her hand across the scaly metal, searching until she found the doorknob. When it turned, her anticipation soared, then sank as the mechanism clanked and froze. Who would lock me in here? Darby collapsed against the door and slid to the floor. Rusty metal slivers cut through her blouse, and spots of blood rose warm on her back. She whispered into the gloom, Why am I here? Snippets of sound and faces flitted. When a mental picture formed, she saw herself standing on the sidewalk with her psychology professor, then looking around for her roommate, Esma. But it was her mother's voice she heard. Never get into a car with a stranger. Now that it happened, she knew she shouldn't have let it, but couldn't remember how or why she did. A confused thought formed, but evaporated before she grasped it. When she pressed against the pain slicing through her forehead, the vision returned. Her heart hammered against her ribcage, surged as it had when the black car screeched to the curb, and the driver jumped out and opened the rear passenger door. She saw herself step back, the image so real, she felt a professor grip her arm, his voice close as he whispered in her ear, "Do not worry, my dear. You will be fine." But she was miles and miles from fine. Darby pushed up from the frigid cement floor and staggered to the iron cot. The exertion caused her to suck down a gulp of air. The reek of mold and urine filled her lungs. A grumble gurgled up from her gut, pushing bitter slime into her throat. Her nose curled with the stink of her own sour breath. Did they poison me? She tried to straighten her spine, but her head lolled forward, impossible to hold up. Warm tears pooled, cooling against her chilly skin. "Help! Please, someone! Anyone!" Her voice faded to a whisper when she realized it was a mistake to call them back to hurt her more. Chapter 2, Nina Richards, Day 2, Sunday evening, March 18th. The ringtone was a welcome break from the computer screen. Darby's mother rubbed her eyes and read the caller ID. Nina Richards sent her daughter's roommate a motherly smile, even though Esma couldn't see it through the phone. "Mrs. Richards, this is Esma Coolin. I must tell you something." Nina pictured Esma at the other end of the line, brows furrowed, sable bangs partially covering one eye. The two girls, assigned as roommates at the University of California, Los Angeles, grew to be fast friends, even though they were as different as the cultures in which they were raised. Her daughter was strong, athletic, with long blonde hair, sparkling eyes, and an instant smile. She reminded Nina of the American Girl doll Darby loved as a child. In perfect contrast, Esma was petite, dark, and exotic, with cocoa-color eyes that hinted they knew more than they revealed. "I am troubled." The girls were young, having graduated from high school only a year ago, at age 17, and Nina understood Esma well enough to realize she was a worrier. First time in the United States, first year in college, living away from her parents, her very protective brother and childhood friends. I'd worry too. "Esma, what's troubling you?" "Mrs. Richards, I am uncertain of how to say this." Nina waited patiently, not overly concerned, until Esma said, "Darby did not return home last night and hasn't called. We always let each other know." "What do you mean she didn't come home?" "Darby left without me. I have not heard from her all day. I do not know what to do." "Did you call her? Text her?" "Many times, Mrs. Richards. Every hour since 10. I did not awaken until then. We stayed out late. When I went to wake Darby to study, she was not in her bedroom. And this afternoon, I drove back to the club. I went inside and asked about her, but no one has seen her." "But you were together, weren't you?" "Yes, Mrs. Richards. We remained together most of the evening, but later we were not. Her bed is still made. She has not been here at all. Perhaps she just left for the gym or the corner bakery for muffins. She always makes the coffee. This morning there was none." Nina glanced at the desk clock. 9:14 p.m. This wasn't the only time she'd worried that her daughter might lose her head over a young man. Could this be the first? Darby had several boyfriends in high school, but none who seemed too intense or caused Nina concern. "Has she met someone, Esma?" "What do you mean, Mrs. Richards?" "Does she have a new boyfriend? Is it serious?" "An entire day has passed. Would she stay out all night?" No. Nina visualized Esma's earnest expression. "We met two nice boys at a fraternity party. We have a date set with them, pizza and a movie. But no, it's not like that at all." Acid burned its way up Nina's throat. "Then where did you go?" Chapter 3, Darby, Day 1, Saturday night, March 17th. "Gambling club? You're kidding, right?" Darby was dumbfounded by her roommate's proposal. Esma had shared tons about her sheltered childhood and restricted teens. Her vigilant father and brother monitored her behavior for compliance with cultural mores and religious teachings. Darby frowned as she tried to reconcile the disparities between all she knew of Esma's protected life in Turkey And what she now proposed. You mean dance club, right? Not gambling club. No, Darby. Esma drew the hair from her eyes. The Belarus is a private gambling club, members only. Except I have an invitation for tonight. My eldest brother belongs to one in Ankara. He says women are not permitted. But here in Los Angeles, this is not true. College girl in Turkey will never experience this. Pretty sure the average college girl in the U.S. won't either. Darby experienced pangs of parental responsibility as she debated how she should react to this role reversal. Esma never owned a swimsuit, attended a beer fest, or dated without a chaperone. Since her 13th birthday, she covered her hair with a scarf whenever going out. As a result of her culture and family upbringing, Esma was cautious, steady, rarely a risk-taker. On the other hand, Darby led the life of a typical Southern California beach girl, accustomed to going everywhere and seeing everything. During their first quarter at UCLA, the girls struggled with their differences, but Darby introduced Esma to American teenageism. By their second quarter, Darby believed they were more alike than different, until now. Esma, your brother will kill me if he finds out I let you go. Then he must never know. Esma interpreted Darby's silence as approval. With small, jerky nods of excitement, she said, "Will you come? A new experience for you also." "Don't know, Esma. Sounds scary. I'm certain private gambling clubs are illegal in California." Darby contemplated the pros and cons. Not a great idea. What if it gets raided and we get arrested? I am confident it's safe. You are? How? I've gone to LA with my parents for theater, movies, family dinners, and lately a couple hot dates. But this? I've never heard of a private gambling club except on crime shows. Who invited you? Professor Balick invited me, and I invite you. Seriously, Esma? Even though they agreed their psychology professor was hot, picturing him as a gangster gambler simply didn't compute. The clubs I've seen in the movies are sleazy, backdoor, down a dark alley, where you give Guido the secret password to enter. Darby, do you not think that evilness is invented for the movies? If it was an okay place to play cards, well, that is not a good movie plot. Besides, Professor Balick invited us, not this Guido person of whom you speak. Good point, but wasn't Spider-Man arrested for private gambling? What are you saying? I attended every Spider-Man movie. He does not gamble in any of them. No, not Spider-Man. I mean Tobey Maguire. Saw something online. Let's Google it. Darby scrolled. Found it. No arrest. Sued for the return of money he won in some guy's Ponzi scheme. Okay, Spider-Man's cleared. But Esma, I'm still not convinced this is a brilliant idea. Darby, Professor Balick would not involve himself in illegal activities. Of course, since this is my first time also, I do not truly know what it will be. But it cannot be the way you say, a sleazy backdoor place where Guido guards the door. I think I watched that movie, the one where innocent women are kidnapped and sold into prostitution. Darby laughed. That's the one. Professor Balick assured me the Belarus is high class, for wealthy people, their own little Monte Carlo. Will you go tonight? Our professor put me on the guest list and will be our host. Host? Does that mean he'll front us gambling money? I just bought my books for spring quarter. Loose change is all I have left. Esma removed a black business card printed in gold from her purse. With this card, and as Professor Balick's guest, we start with a courtesy allowance. But, Darby, I have money. My parents established an emergency fund. We will stop at the ATM. Esma smiled and bobbed her head. This is not exactly an emergency, but it will be a new experience for both of us. I think that qualifies. I'm still a little leery. Let's see if there's anything online about this place. Darby typed private gambling clubs. They found instructions for charity gambling, a Delaware bill for private gambling clubs, legalities on private gambling, and Wikipedia's site titled Gentleman's Club. Esma, we won't find what we're searching for. This club is private. If it's illegal, it won't pop up. Let's type the name on the card, Belarus. As Darby scrolled further, Esma said, there is nothing bad regarding Belarus. Nothing good either. There's just nothing. Without the E at the end, Belarus is a country in Europe. Please, Darby, let us go tonight. Only for a short time. Quarter exams provide us with an acceptable excuse to withdraw early. Tomorrow morning, we cram. I am most behind in microbiology. The scientific terms, when I interpret them from English to Turkish and back again, by then I am confused. Esma shook her head in frustration. Okay, you win. I'll go. But promise we'll only stay an hour. Not even that long if the place is the least bit seedy. Of course, Darby, whatever you say, it will be your choice. A smile unfurled across Esma's face. What will you wear? And I'll stop there because that concludes chapter 3.
Well, thank you so much. Pat Spencer is active on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and those URLs will be in the show notes. And for more information about Pat and her books, you can visit her website at patspencer.net. Thank you again so much for being with us today, Pat.
Oh, thank you, Laurie. It's a real pleasure. Thank you for all you do for us struggling writers.
There's one more episode in this first season of Murder in the Air Mystery Theater. Be back next time when on episode number 16, you'll hear the conclusion for the film noir story L.N. Payne, P.I. from Dead Air. If you are listening on the podcast platform of your choice, please subscribe and leave a review or provide us with some feedback. If you're on YouTube at Read Laurie Fagen, please subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and click on the bell to be notified when a new episode has been released. And for more freebies, check out our Patreon page at Murder in the Air Mystery Theater. Remember I mentioned prizes? At the end of each of these Murder in the Air podcasts, we'll have a drawing for a prize from those who follow Read Laurie Fagen on Facebook or Instagram, and in the comment, write murder to be entered in a drawing. We'll have drawings for free ebooks, chances to win your name in a novel, and other fun items. So go to Facebook or Instagram, follow Read Laurie Fagen, and write murder in the comment. For more information, you can visit readlauriefagen.com. Thanks so much for listening, and come back again for more Murder in the Air.